Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie discovers his wife's infidelity through her forgotten phone. He exposes the affair at her workplace. He confronted the coworker, sparked chaos, and changed the locks, leading to the couple quitting their jobs and leaving town. With a divorce finalized through the mail, he was relieved, embracing a fresh start after the tumultuous revelation and subsequent move 500 miles west, away from the painful past and infidelity. Now let's get into the story. One fateful day when my wife went to work, she forgot her phone. I took the opportunity to check it and was appalled. My wife found I should have known what was going on because my wife, 25, was extremely excited about going to work. Suddenly, she said it was because she became in charge of a business task that she really enjoyed. It was something like designing different abstract images each day for a newsletter. I, 28, believed her. She was a good girl and I was proud of her for earning us additional income for living expenses. The only other dead giveaway was that she didn't want to have intimate as often. But then I knew why. It was because she was sexting with a coworker, sending pictures and talking about the intimate they had. It was disgusting. I drove to her work immediately. I backed up all the stuff from her phone because although she wasn't getting it back, it was going to be deactivated. I brought it with me and started by showing the receptionist, who I'd only met once before. Then I asked her if I could get a guest pass to go have lunch with my wife. She giggled and gave me one. She knew I was sarcastically infuriated, and this was going to be a heck of a show. She followed me in, putting up a "be back in 5 minutes" sign that she scribbled out. Everyone looked up from their desks to see me. I must have looked determined and angry. I asked everyone to gather around, and they did. I said I had some news to share about somewhere they all knew well. They were all sparkly-eyed with gossip endorphins. When they found out who I was talking about, people started looking around for AP and my wife. AP came out of the bathroom just then, and we all looked at him. I announced that there was a guy who had the audacity to sleep with my wife. Some of the coworkers started shouting out insults at him. Among these, he was called despicable. Just then, my wife's head peeked out of her office. When she saw everyone looking at her, she went back inside and shut the door. Now everyone knew what my wife and AP looked like naked. Some girls whispered that they knew something was going on between them. The time to print draw signs that said slanderous insults and tape them on my wife's office door. I thanked them for their creativity and left wondering where the boss was. That allowed all this to happen. When my wife got back to the house, I already had the locks changed. She took the stuff I let her have to AP's house. They both quit their jobs that day and walked out. Shamefully, in our town, there was just one major employer for like half the population. So when I shared with people the things my wife talked about and took pictures of, everyone in the area knew about it or saw it. It didn't take long for them to decide to move about 500 miles west. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. Since she moved out of state, our divorce was made final through the mail. She didn't ask me for anything, thank God, but I would have been able to prove her infidelity anyway. She was done with me in the embarrassing past she was trying to forget. I felt the same way about her and couldn't be happier with the choice I made. Today's second story. In this story, a married couple's seemingly idyllic relationship takes a turn when they attend a non-traditional retreat. Despite a promise to remain faithful, the wife secretly engages in a year-long affair with a man named Doug, leading to the dissolution of their marriage. The husband discovers the betrayal through a letter and hires a private investigator to confirm her infidelity. Confronted with evidence, the wife confesses, expressing remorse. The husband, initially considering reconciliation, learns she is pregnant with Doug's child. The story reflects the consequences of selfish choices and the painful unraveling of a once strong bond. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I met at a rock climbing event in the old western United States. We were married 6 years before we decided to go on a very hippie-like retreat that had about 50 people attending. It mostly coupled that were against traditional stereotypes and what normal behavior is. So yes, there was nudity and other things there that society would most likely frown upon. Before we even got settled in the camp, we promised each other we would not have intimate with anyone else, only each other. We enjoyed the getaway in nature with like-minded individuals, but we weren't okay with breaking our promise to each other, or so I thought. On the second night there, we attended the bonfire that was held each night. During the stay, groups of people formed and we started great conversations with anyone in hearing range. My conversation wasn't always the same one my wife was having, but I didn't mind or notice anything weird about that night. Looking back now, it was probably the first night she spoke to the man we'll call Doug. We partied hard for the next few days and started sticking with a specific group of people that included Doug. Some days and nights are a blur, but I don't necessarily remember being separated from my wife at any time during the vacation. When we got home, my wife was really happy and exceptionally peaceful. Over the course of a year, my wife became a little more fake. She didn't tell me any of her thoughts and would get defensive if I said she looked sad or upset about something. Well, I had the feeling that our relationship was coming to an end despite my attempts to rekindle the flame. It was around this time that I found a letter in the mail. It was opened and crumpled up in the bottom of the trash. The only reason I found it was because our dog knocked over the can. It was from Doug to my wife. He wrote about taking off her clothes and escaping their daily lives with each other. In the end, he asked if she would meet him at a hotel on a specific weekend. I was shaking. I could not believe my wife was still communicating with this man from over a year ago. I couldn't believe she never told me anything about it, but instead kept pretending she was content being my wife. I hired a pie to follow her and watched the hotel mentioned in the letter. When my wife came to tell me about a friend of hers reaching out unexpectedly and inviting her out to a bachelorette party, I knew it was BS. I intentionally grilled her and asked her a lot of completely justified questions. I even asked for the girl's phone number and she refused, complaining that I didn't trust her. I pretended she persuaded me and had a good point. I mentioned how I trusted her to be a good and loyal wife because that's all she'd ever been to me. I swear I saw her cringe when I said that. As soon as she left, I informed the pie to be on the lookout in 30 minutes. He started sending me pictures. It was her greeting and giving a warm embrace to none other than Doug. It was surreal to see it happening. Sometime later, I got the rest of the pictures, which was enough to prove they spent time alone in hotel and have no problem kissing on the lips. I pride myself on being a handyman, so after I threw up, I changed the locks on her doors. When she tried to return home the next day after her nice little weekend affair, she was disturbed to find that her house key no longer worked, and I refused to answer her calls. After standing outside the house for 2 hours, her mom came and picked her up. I didn't know what lies she was telling her, but it gave me comfort to know she was panicked. She had no choice but to stay with her mom until I finally came over to their house. It was the first time in 2 weeks that she saw my face or heard from me, and she broke down sobbing. She tried to hug me, and I held my arm out straight to stop her. She cried and begged me to listen, but all I did was show her the pictures. The PI sent me. She told me she was sorry. She let her feelings get way out of control for this guy, and she regretted everything she'd done. I told her I'd think about getting back together, but I only said it because I needed her to let me leave. It's a good thing I didn't take her back right then, because a few months later, she discovered she was pregnant. I didn't mention it until now, but at this time, she and I had a 2-year-old daughter that she was missing terribly. Her parents lived in a retirement home, so they weren't allowed to have anyone living with them, especially not children. It was bad enough they were hiding their daughter there, but now she was expecting a child from an affair. Her dad was appalled. Shortly after she was officially divorced from me, I found out that Doug, the father of her unborn child, was a married man. He would have nothing to do with her or their child. I also found out that my wife and Doug had physical relations at the couple's retreat we went on a year and a half before and had been seeing each other ever since. She always tells me she deeply regrets what she's done, but it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone has to live with the consequences of their selfish decisions and mistakes. I hope she's able to learn from hers. Today's third story. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I were married for 18 years. Some of the magic in the bedroom was fading, I'll admit that, but we were also parents to 2 children, 12 and 16 years old. In an attempt to rekindle our relationship, I got us a new bed frame and mattress fit for royalty, along with lingerie for her. She loved it, and it actually did help us relax and have a good time. We worked a lot, so I made arrangements for my 22-year-old nephew to babysit for us. When my wife met him again for the first time in 5 years, he'd grown into a young man and I saw her face. It made me mad. I actually brought it up with her, how her eyes sparkled when she saw him, and I reminded her he's only a few years older than our oldest. She thought I was being ridiculous and denied anything I saw. I'd known her long enough to know when she was excited or liked what she saw. She couldn't hide it. Fast forward another month and there wasn't much of a change. Nothing that bad, but nothing that great either. Even though I was trying, we each had something to do after work, separately, so I asked my nephew to go to our house to watch the kids again. My wife told me she'd be home at the same time as me. When I got home, her car was already there, and so was my nephew's. The house looked dark. I didn't find anyone downstairs, so I went upstairs, pretty nervous about what I was going to find. Our bedroom door was open and the lights were on while my wife turned off the television. My nephew looked extremely nervous that I was home. Seeing him in my bedroom, I asked what was going on and my wife said nothing. They were just watching Tella. The kids went to bed. My nephew was silent, looking around the room nervously before he said he had to go. I paid him hesitantly. He had trouble looking me in the eye. After he left, I noticed my wife's undergarments on the floor, nearly under the bed. I asked her if anything bad happened while I was, and she was caught off guard by the question, but she just asked what I meant and said no. I was just super uncomfortable laying in bed all night. The next day, I managed to pull myself together with an hour of sleep and sit in my car ready to leave for work before I pulled out my phone. Dinged. It was a long message from my nephew. He apologized for having intimate with my wife last night. He said he couldn't sleep at all. He felt so bad for what he'd done, and he couldn't forgive himself until I forgave him. The poor kid didn't realize he stole my whole life away from me. Everything I worked for and built with my wife and the mother of my children was gone. I only replied to thank him for telling me, but I was devastated. I couldn't drive. I couldn't move. My wife came out to go to work, and I wouldn't move my car out from behind hers. She expected me to, so she sat in her car waiting. She was on her phone and got a message from my nephew telling her. He told me what they did. I walked up to her window and could hear her on the phone calling him a little turd for telling me. When she explicitly told him not to tell me anything, she was freaking out. And when she noticed me standing next to her window, she jumped out of her skin, then started crying. I broke down too, because it was hard to look at her. I told her everything we had was done over. I started walking back in the house and she followed me, panicking and crying. She asked me to forgive her for this one mess up. In all the years we were married, she was loyal to me and the mother of my children. She didn't want me to break up our family just because of this one moment of weakness. I told her it wasn't just one moment of weakness. It was a moment she decided she would have intimate with my nephew behind my back. It was a choice she made to betray me, her husband of 18 years. I told her I never wanted to see her again. She gave up on us. Our marriage got boring, so she gave up and cheated on me. I was sobbing, which made her sob. I wasn't worried about my ability to move on from this. I was crying for our kids. Their lives were going to change, and it was because of their mom. I was willing to stay with her through thick and thin, no matter what. I would sacrifice and communicate whatever it took, but it takes two. I told her to get out of the house. She hadn't brought enough change into our kids' lives. The least she could do was leave the house so they didn't have to move with me. After arguing, she actually agreed, but warned me she was going to get custody of them. I didn't argue. I knew I could prove her infidelity and irresponsibility. In addition to that, the court ruled everything should remain as normal for the children as possible. So they continued living with me and going to the same school. My wife had to live with her closest relative for a while, an aunt that didn't know her very well and lived 45 minutes away. The kids were extremely upset. It isn't easy on anyone when a family is broken apart. And each time they spoke on the phone with their mom or saw her in person, it was awkward. And they wanted to know why she broke up with their dad. They told me she would cry when they asked because there wasn't a good answer. And I knew she felt like a stupid, foolish woman. She eventually gave up carpooling to work in the area, but I think it's because even the people she worked with knew what she did. I became somewhat of a bachelor for the middle-aged women in town, and I couldn't complain. Someone else started watching my kids, but I never told the kids why.